I'm Christopher Curry. I've been doing this sort of thing for an awfully long time and working in electronics since I was 20, and I'm now nearly 70.
How did you get started in electronics computing technology? What was your earliest memories?
The first things I was doing was going to rubbish dumps, pulling out old ECC83s from old televisions and building amplifiers for guitarists with them. So that really was hounding around on rubbish dumps, finding old televisions.
Fantastic. Why amplifiers?
Well, because there were a lot of pop groups around and they all wanted amplifiers. You know, the acoustic guitars weren't enough, and amplifiers were quite expensive. So we used to build amplifiers out of a couple of ECC83s, and I've forgotten the other one, but we had the power valve and transformers that we picked up out of televisions as well. And all sorts of happy customers. I don't think we sold very many, but we did make quite a few. It was a hobby.
Yeah.
And then we'd go and get free entry to their pop concerts or whatever they were doing in those days. I mean, it was pretty crude stuff, I can tell you, but it was fun. And making a loud noise come out of nothing was fun too.
Anybody famous?
Afraid not.
No?
No.
And it was purely for the love of doing it. So have you got any musical interests yourself?
No, it's one of the great regrets of my life that I've never been any good at anything to do with music. I like listening to it.
Fantastic.
Can't play a note or sing a note.
But you can make everybody else's louder.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, early guitar amplifiers were about clarity, but trying to make things perfect. But then there was a big switch over to everybody just wanting distortion. What side of things?
We provide the distortion from the start, don't worry. I mean, we had absolutely no attention to detail in the quality of the sound. It's amazing what a good sound you can make if you're in the early days of electric guitars. It just sounded fabulous whatever you did. The controlled distortion was a luxury that came later, and we were well out of it by then. And by then, I'd spotted a certain Clive Sinclair making amplifiers that sounded as if they produced many more watts than we could with our valves, and so I bought one called X10. 10 watts it was supposed to be. It was a pulse width modulated amplifier, and I think it produced about 3.5 watts in reality. But then Clive always had a good way of presenting the figures for his
peak
advertising.
or RMS.
It was all about
Absolute
peak and RMS. I had a period of being away from trying to make amplifiers and things. I had a period working at the Royal Radar establishment in Malvern, where wonderful things like superconducting diodes I was building, believe it or not. 2 bits of aluminium, a few angstrom units thick, and put them in liquid nitrogen, take them down, liquid helium rather, and you could switch 10 amps with a couple of milliamps. It was magic. But that was an interlude away from Cambridge. Other than that, I've born here and been here ever since. Mm-hmm. So when I came back from Malvern, my X10 amplifier was still in a box, and I used to lend it to people to do discos and things like that. And then I thought, he was advertising, looking for people to join him. He was just moving to Cambridge. So we went to see him, his house in Newmarket Road, and he gave us the job on the spot. Didn't really ask anything about us, apart from the fact I'd already got a X10, and that seemed a good enough qualification. So started working in Newmarket Road from then onwards.
So what sort of time was this?
65. Right. Yeah.
Okay. So what were you doing then for Sinclair at that time? How can he take you on and say, okay, come and work for me? What was the game plan?
At that time, he was making the notorious Matchbox radios. And it was the Micro 6 that he was making when he came to Cambridge, and my first project was something called the Chromatic, which is a sort of upgrade of the Micro 6, using less transistors. Because one thing Clive always did was if he could make something with one resistor less, he would make it with one resistor less. Everything was built to be as minimalist as possible. So far from going from this 3 transistor reflexed design, we went to a 2 transistor design for the Chromatic. It worked better, and it looked a bit smarter. So we had about 3 versions of that, with different kinds of ways of making it work better, and most of them went out as kits. Awful lot of them came back, but that was half the fun of it. And people loved it, actually, and they loved the sort of the interface with the people that were making them. There was very, very few hard feelings when things didn't work when they first built them. They just came back, asked for advice, or sent it back to repair, and we did it. Wonderful, wonderful times. This was a brand new marketplace of do-it-yourselfers. You have to remember that there wasn't much of that. There was wonderful shops like Henry's Radio and one or two others that was selling valve kits and things, but there wasn't much that you could choose from. So what Sinclair did was to broaden that market from the real, the very few in those days techie types that knew what a valve was, to anybody that wanted to listen to the radio. And so you had a very, very unsophisticated market to build and deal with. And at the same time as that was happening, the early amplifiers were being built. And it was really the amplifiers that took over from the radios. In those days, hi-fi didn't really exist. You had the odd radiogram, which was a big piece of furniture, you know, with a lid at one end, a lid at the other, and you kept drinks, and a peculiar turntable in one end, a big speaker in the middle, and a valve amplifier lurking somewhere. And it cost, 75 quid, which is sort of 500 quid in those days, or more. So when Clive brought out his little amplifier modules, I can't remember which the first one was, but the one that sold most was a Z12, and the preamplifier to go with it. You could take any box that you could fit a record player into and put this into the box. So lots and lots of people who were actually more likely to be the furniture building kind of DIYer got into electronics. And they had to, by the way, because you had to connect up the power supplies to the mains. You didn't get, it wasn't the times of welded on, molded on plugs. You had to deal with the mains and you had to wire it properly. And this was pretty strange for a lot of those people. But there were lots of them and they did it. And I can tell you one of them who took this rather seriously was Alan Sugar, who was just starting up at that time. And he used to come around and buy Z12s and the preamps to build into the boxes that he made, the wooden boxes, bought the electronics from us and sold them as hi-fi systems. And that's really how he got started, actually, by buying Sinclair amplifiers and putting them in boxes.
Sugar.
He used to come in a white van and pick it up.
Yeah.
I used to put his box of stuff out for him.
Interesting. That's a nice little crossover.
And a transit van. But the amplifier business was interesting, but it did enormously expand the number of DIYers, and they became, instead of being people that cut up bits of wood and stuck them together, they became people that used soldering irons. So it really had a huge effect on the available marketplace for what was to follow.
Fantastic. Where did it go from there? What was the, so you've mentioned about how these were being built by people that really weren't electronicsy type people, but probably sort of started to get people more aware of electronics, maybe took a few other people into that industry just by nature anyway. Where did it lead on to from there? So you had the early things, because at that time Sinclair was doing a lot of audio, it was all audio products. I think,
It was nearly all audio stuff in those days, if you count little radios as audio, but we sort of produced a high fidelity, what was called hi-fi, stereo, which was pretty new, you see, stereo. So if you could get your harmonic distortion below 0.3%, I think you qualified as hi-fi, and we just about qualified. So then we started making loudspeakers as well, and complete systems with ranges of you know, well-priced consumer high fidelity. And I suppose it was the hi-fi that actually created the big growth of Sinclair Radionics. I mean, not as big as what was to come later, but it made it big enough for Sinclair to become a major player. We moved to the mill in St Ives, and occupied gradually more and more floors of this building, and the labs were on the top floor, and we had to carry all our boxes of stuff up because the lift wasn't working. I remember a very energetic time as moving. But just at that time, our connections with Texas Instruments, where we used to buy some of better quality transistors and one or two other things from, led to Clive discovering about a chip that was being developed in Texas. And I was sent over one New Year's, it was the day after a New Year's Eve party, most appalling hangover, to fly to Texas and collect some samples of a chip. And I went there and back in 2 days and brought back with me three chips, TMS 1802, and they were the first single chip calculator chips. They weren't an entire chip. You had to do a few other things as well, but so from the time I got back, I had to sit down and work out how this thing did anything and build it into a prototype, which was great fun, especially when Clive's standing over you ferociously, haranguing you the whole time. And built a prototype, and I think it was probably the moment when I almost couldn't believe what I saw. The clock wasn't the right speed or anything like that, but the first time we got it running at all, the chip, driving an LED display, and this is a 7-segment display, suddenly saw that for the first time it light up and characters form on it, and then pressing the keyboard and the times key and another number, because the clock was running slow, the display was running backwards and forwards and produced the result. One of the most frequent tests was always pi, 22/7 and 3.142. And watching it do that, and I just called the others round and we all looked at this display, and it just did this. It did this calculation which we'd always done with a slide rule or logarithms. It was magic, absolutely magic. So very quickly, Clive organised the advertising. Somebody else produced a design for a case, and a couple of others involved helped to make the power supply circuit and everything else. And the executive calculator was produced about 5 months after we picked those chips up. And that changed everything. I mean, that product, which cost us exactly £11 to make, I'm not counting any of the non-returnable costs, but £11 to make, and we sold it for £79. It was a bloody good margin calculator. I don't think anybody's seen a calculator like that since. and they sold like hotcakes. We couldn't make them fast enough.
What was it like? Okay, so you said that Sinclair stands over you, haranguing you. And what was the relationship like? Generally, well, not your relationship, but generally the workplace.
Well, Clive had his office downstairs. The labs were on the top floor. We had Radio 3, or the third program as it was, playing all the time in the labs. And we did a bit of fooling around and burnt each other with soldering irons and so on. And when we heard Clive running up the stairs, as he always did, everybody looked as busy as possible and hoped he wouldn't start questioning or shouting, because he did a lot of that. You had to have a fairly thick skin, but everybody got used to it, and after quite a short time, Clive and I, we worked late every day. There was always something new being developed and a huge pressure on. The usual reason being that the advertising had been booked and the product hadn't been developed, but never mind.
So are you working late because you were paid to work late, or is it?
Nobody ever was paid overtime or anything. It was because, what else was there to do? We usually work till 8 o'clock on a normal day, and then go out and drink. Clive as well, we'd all go for a few gins and so on, and whatever transpired later in the evening. But that's another story. No, we usually work till 8 o'clock. Not everybody, because in those days you had office staff. You had the sort of people handling orders and people looking at accountants and things like that. All the sort of conventional things which seemed largely to have disappeared from modern small businesses. I suppose they haven't, but they just don't show so much. But all the engineers and the service people, the 5 or 6 of us, were nearly always there till 8 o'clock at night, as was Clive.
And it's mostly because you just want to be.
Well, yeah, it was nice. It was fun.
Was it a different Clive in the office than it was when he was out, after work? Because he can come up and shout at you during the day, but
I think he was the same Clive. He's still always irascible. You can have a jolly even-tempered conversation, and suddenly he'll disagree point blank on something, and if you disagreed back, it led to shouts and things. But it was, all over by the next day or 5 minutes later.
Yeah, so it's a blow up and then that's it, back to normal. Yeah. Was it ever sort of a two-way thing? Could you do the same to him?
Nobody did. I mean, you just went quiet, and if you may have wanted to. I think it came a lot later that 1 or 2 people, including myself, had a bit of a shout back, but there was no point, and it was always harmless. You knew what he was like, so you didn't mind.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So let's skip on a little bit and get to the early days of, where Sinclair was changing, and but the trouble with the NNEB and what have you. But more around the time now where you were off, he'd sent you off to go and look at doing a new product and take it into the realms of computing. Because I get the feeling that, had it not been for you, probably Clive would have never been in computing. I don't know if that's fair to say or not.
Well, I think so, but then he probably wouldn't agree.
Yeah. Okay.
But so there's a period of time where the fortunes go up and down a bit, and this is when the televisions were being done. The televisions were expensive developments, and they were almost impossible to build and very difficult to sell, and actually difficult to sell in many ways. That Clive's had a very simplistic argument about portable televisions. I mean, nowadays he would have been proved right, because we're all used to looking at very small screens, but on our phones they were even smaller than those, and the resolution wasn't as good either. But his argument was that if you're looking at a television in your sitting room, the angle subtended to the eye is no different from the angle subtended to the eye, microvision being held here. Everybody else found that argument slightly suspicious in that holding something and watching at Wimbledon didn't really work very well, but that didn't stop Clive. But it was actually quite difficult to convince people that a normal television was sensible with a 1.5-inch screen. And the original microvision was 1.5-inch screen, and actually the one that came later with the electrostatic version of it was also 1.5-inch screen. So there were problems, and they were probably fairly visible to a lot of people. But Clive didn't want to see them. He'd got the television really at his heart, and he wanted it to happen. But it cost dearly. So at some stage, when the finances of the company weren't too well, the NEB started. It was a fairly odd organisation in the first place, the NEB, National Enterprise Board. It had real socialism at its heart. It almost wanted to nationalise things. You could feel it. But, they started pushing their weight around a bit. You know, we've lent you this money, so we're going to say this is what's going to happen. And in due course, there was a need to reduce the numbers of staff to save money, and to stop doing some of the projects that were underway at the time. He and I looked at the enormous number of leftover components we had from the calculators and thought, what can we do? What can we do to use these up? And it was my task to go and turn a load of General Electric chips, calculator chips, turn them into a wrist calculator. So we did one on the watch. That's right. The other product at the time, of course, which was causing trouble, was the black watch. That would have been about 68, 69. So a company called, I think it was originally called Sinclair Instrument. It was separate from the one that the NEB had control of. And it was only me and Clive was set up, and we built these little wrist calculators, and mostly shipped them over to the States, because there was a Sinclair company in the States which was also outside the control of the NEB, and Clive wanted to try and keep that one going, even though he was having a losing battle with the NEB. So we shipped most of these, about 80,000 of them over to the States. A few were sold in this country, again as kits. If you've got a big enough country like America, they bought them and were quite happy with them. An awful fiddly soldering job, was a neat looking little thing, but it was pretty inappropriate really on the wrist, but it was a good way of using up stock and selling it and making a profit. So Sinclair Instrument built that, and then the other way of using up the scientific ones was to try and make something which was very close to a scientific calculator, but a bit more. And that's when Rodney Dale appeared on the scene with a proposition to make something which was a bit like a microcomputer out of a programmable calculator chips. But during the process of that, it seemed to me that it didn't really quite. I didn't quite see the point of that one. It was so obviously a way of using up old calculator chips. And a chap from National Semiconductor approached me and said, "Look, we've got this new microchip called the Scamp. Why don't you do something with that? You can use the application note is virtually the whole of the design. Just turn it into a product," which we did very quickly, but by this time had renamed the company Science of Cambridge. and we launched the MK14 as it was, and single printed circuit board, a collection of components, a kit, of course. It was MK14 because microprocessor kit, and it had 14 components, I think, the main components, 14 main components. So we sold 90,000 of them, which was a huge number, 39 quid or something like that each. And so with, again, moved into offices in King's Parade, where I had a secretary, and we had various people putting the kits together around Cambridge, including Clive's wife. Not building them, putting them into plastic bags with the instruction book. A friend of mine did a wonderful set of starter applications for it. You had to, there were no tapes, anyway, this thing had 256 bytes of memory, and that was it. I think it had 128 actually as standard.
So how did you program it?
With a keyboard in hex. So
you've
got a display
you're
display like a calculator, hex keyboard, and using the instruction set, machine code, and most people loved it, except the ones that unfortunately got some of the keyboards that where the rubber, which was conductive, was the wrong grade, and it didn't conduct properly. So there were people that had bought themselves special thimbles that they could press really hard onto to get the number to enter, and they just wrote it up. They wrote letters to the hobbyist magazines and said, "This is what I find is the right way to do it." You can't imagine that sort of thing now, but they were a good bunch, our customers. We had great fun with them. We didn't try to diddle them; they were happy.
It sounds like there's quite a close relationship with customers. I mean, because
I stayed in the office all through Christmas Day, Boxing Day, answering, because that's when people opened them. And there was nobody else to do it, and that was good. I loved it.
So why do you think the MK14 was so popular? Because computers, to a lot of people, they're ubiquitous now, but at that time, the word computer was foreign to a lot of people. Yeah,
I think it was just the newness, the new idea. I mean, the reason I'd always looked at companies, when I used to go to London, there was a company on the right called Elliott Automation. I loved the word automation. And there were certain things that just struck a chord somewhere. And I think an awful lot of other people found that the microprocessor was something that it's obviously the next thing to try. They'd done the hi-fi stuff. They'd done most of the other electronic assembly stuff. This was the next thing. So they were all ready, waiting for the next thing. There were so many. The magazines that catered for these people had been growing steadily. Not until PC World, of course, didn't exist. The big Personal Computer World, which was the top one, that had to come later. But the practical wireless, practical electronics, Wireless World, of course, a real mainstay of our Britain's technical life. But they'd been doing quite well, those magazines, and so they'd been building a steady readership and supporting a pretty sizable marketplace for people that wanted to build things with soldering irons and resistors and things. So they naturally leapt at the MK14's opportunity. And that just said it all for me. I mean, it's, there's so many, there's no end. I didn't realise just how much there wasn't an end to what could be done at that stage. But and about then, of course, we were seeing talk of Apple in the States doing some interesting things. But our response to that was to come a bit later under a different name. Mm-hmm. Because about that time, Clive, who'd been a bit reluctant on to do the MK14, I'd sort of had to do it almost on the quiet because he wanted. I think at about that time he'd realised, when he saw the sales, realised that this is something that he should be doing in Sinclair Radionics in order to try and put the NEB back in its box with a successful product that made money. So after that, after the MK14, he and I sort of separated, and at the time, this is when, of course, we were building add-on units for the MK14, and that was fun because there was a video interface, for instance, which seemed a bit silly because since you're only putting up hex, but a video interface and a tape interface and this memory extension and the edge connector that we'd wisely put on the board came in handy.
So who was doing these extensions?
Well, I had various friends and people.
Products.
By the time we were doing extensions, there were people that ultimately came to work for the early form of Acorn, who were just hobbyists and local people from the computer lab, started doing a lot of the development work in their spare time, and it would get incorporated into one of the products and sold, and they'd get paid for their work and so on. But about this time, Herman, who I knew from hanging around in bars really, which I did rather more than him, but that's how I met him, and he took great interest and used to come up and play with things up in the top floor of King's Parade, which strictly speaking was a Clive and me establishment, not a Herman establishment. So in due course, as Clive was going one way, I was going the other, we had somebody wanted something from us, came to us and said, can you help us in this? And they were some very hairy people from the Welsh hills, the valleys, I mean, who made one-armed bandits. And you know, they were hairy people. You know, I don't mean hirsute. I mean, really, it was one of those businesses which was run by close to racketeering. You know, and he came to us and said, "Can you make something to compete with this thing? It's a new gaming machine that's got a microprocessor controller in it." And it was all in a sealed gold box. He said, "I can show you it, you can't look inside it." I said, "Well, what do you want to do?" "Well, we've got these wheels that go round, and we've got things that come up and lights that flash everywhere and buttons that you press, and we need to control it, make it simpler to operate and so on." So we took this job on. I think it was worth £15,000, the contract to build a prototype of a fruit machine, and using some of the early Acorn modules, with mainly Steve Ferber's design skills. We built that and delivered it, and there were lots of issues on the way. It was a complicated machine, a twin processor system, and all sorts of problems, like it had to work next door to an electric furnace which produced, which pumped thousands of amps about in great sparking machinery all the time, and it was enough to knock any electronics on its head. But so we had to build in lots of protection circuits and so on. But it worked, and it's what really got the Acorn business going from that contract, which allowed us to be able to afford to make more of what was called the System 1 modules.
So what was the relationship between Sinclair and Acorn at that time? That seems a little bit, two things going on at the same time.
It was a bit, yeah, there was a bit of two things going on at the same time. So what I did because Clive and I were both owners of Science of Cambridge, what I did was we kept doing, looking after this. I kept looking after the Science of Cambridge work, and the third-party opportunities that arose out of it were done by Cambridge Processor Unit, like the contract for the fruit machine and one or two other things. And it wasn't really until Clive had decided, it had almost got to the stage of launching, getting ready to launch the what was it called, the first
ZX80.
one? ZX80. That I was able to sort of say, well, he's gone that way, he's gone back there, so I'm going to go this way here, and we agreed on a sort of settlement at the end of Science of Cambridge, and I was able to start building the Atom, which was an alternative to the board level system that.
Yeah, the system
otherwise.
range. Because you had the System 1. Because
System
System 1 was
1.
out before the ZX80.
Yeah, yeah. The System 1 was out before the ZX80, and but the Atom came just a bit after it.
Yeah. So was the fruit machine thing based on Acorn or CPU at the time system components, or
Yes,
was
yes, it was.
It was.
It was. But the reason they came to us is because of the visibility of the MK14 as a microprocessor thing. They came to us, and this was clearly not a job for a one-man band called Sinclair, called Science of Cambridge. It was a job for a consultancy consisting of some good local solid engineering people as well. And it was a very gentle, almost unnoticeable separation. It was much later that it became a bit more competitive.
Would you say it's fair to say that the competition between the two of you drove both companies equally, or was it much more on his side reacting to Acorn products, or?
Well,
hard to tell from anybody's point of
it
view.
goes. One's got the differences varied according to the passage of time, and actually there wasn't. It was a quiet, determined sort of growth on the two sides, and there was very little communication until the going got rough, and that's when the pressures really started to show. And I think it was. I mean, there was a bit of pressure at the time on the BBC when the BBC opportunity came up. The Atom was competing nicely with the ZX80, but it wasn't really affecting each other's markets. One was nearly twice the price of the other, and one had a proper keyboard, one was very jazzy looking. So they were trotting along quite happily in parallel. And by that time there were a lot of other people all trying to do the same thing, especially in the Cambridge area. There were tangerines and dragons and all sorts of things. The annoying thing for Clive was that the BBC was basing it on, had announced that they're going to base it on New Brain, which was the company that they had intended to take over the NEB, another NEB company that they'd intended to take over the Sinclair company with. So by that time it didn't seem to matter. So when I heard or read something about the BBC going to do something, and so I rang Clive and said, "What's this? What do you know about this?" He said, "I know nothing about it." I said, "Well, I thought you must have known about it because it's New Brain and NEB is." He said he didn't. Clive sold things by putting a lot of money into advertising, and a lot of the advertising, it had to work because otherwise the advertising wouldn't have been possible to be paid for. And there's an element of that on our side as well. We did a bit, it was the way you did things. You have a pretty good idea how many you're going to sell. Cash flow is a constant worry, so you have to take your chances. I said that having a BBC programme about one of those computers is going to be most valuable advertising campaign that none of us could ever even contemplate launching. So I got in contact with BBC, and I was told it was going to be based on New Brain. And I said, well, I think you really ought to see, because we're just about to launch something called the Proton, which was the next generation after the atom. A certain reluctance of the BBC. They'd been told by the DTI what they'd got to do, and their job was to make a program. But eventually, the people involved in making the program started to prevail, and they said, right, let's have a look, because the New Brain product is behind schedule. So let's have a look at what's around. And they did, and we showed them some fairly attractive product, which ultimately they chose as the one that they'd badge. But they were under quite a bit of pressure from the Department of Trade, the DTI, to make sure that they were doing the program for all the other home computers available at the time as well. But that of course was a fairly complex set of things that happened then. A lot of, there's been an awful lot of versions of it already. I don't know how much you want me to rehash that, but getting the decision in favour of the BBC computer from Acorn was very largely because we had a much better team of people than anybody else, and really what had been planned into it from the start answered every question that they could put up. You know, the New Brain was based on a Z80, and I suppose would have been running on some CPM type operating system. But so having started with that, there's a big question about which is going to be the predominant operating system in the future. And we got away with that one completely by saying, well, the Proton is a twin processor machine. So we've got a 6502 doing all the front end, and we can have another 6502 behind it, or we can have a Z80. So we've, next question, and really that was very simplistic. It wasn't entirely, well, it was true in theory, but we hadn't much intention of it being true. Everything else, like they wanted their own particular version of BASIC, which happened to coincide with Roger's version of things anyway, so he'd more or less catered for their requirements there as well. A little bit of modification. And they made the right choice in the end.
I'll throw a quick question in.
I think so.
We actually spoke to David Allen last week. He said he came along to Acorn to visit you, and then went away and came back. You can remember that visit?
Yeah, well, I don't think he was the only one that came. I do remember the visits, and one of them, of course, was the one that's been immortalised in celluloid, where we had a demo waiting for them, and it wasn't going to work, and there was an earth loop or something, that a snip of a pair of wire cutters, and it worked, which is absolutely true. But I think David Allen came on that visit. He came on most of them. He was our main interface with that program, apart from the producer, John Radcliffe. And then, of course, later on, the chap that was the advisor, the educational advisor from Oundle School, whose name I've forgotten, and shouldn't have done. Yes, I mean, the BBC had, as you'd expect, had a lot of sought out a lot of wisdom on the subject, and everybody needed to have their say. And as Richard Russell, for instance, you know, he was a very insistent person from BBC Engineering, much more prickly and difficult to satisfy than most of them. But everybody was happy in the end, except possibly the people at New Brain and of course Clive, who was absolutely furious about it.
What was the work ethic like at that kind of time? I mean, you've kind of you've said at Sinclair, you know, it was you know, a bit of messing around and get told off and carry on. But when I spoke to Sophie about actually about the film, trying to get some things out, I did a little scene whereby there was a timer thing and you had to do something and hit the timer. So I spent ages writing this little program on the Atom to do this scene. And she completely would not have it. It was not going in the film. We didn't mess around at Acorn. It was work all the time. I can't believe that. So how do you see things?
I mean, certainly it depends who you're talking about. And Roger, Sophie, he's always Roger to me, of course, but he was a sort of result of what had happened at the university, where people that wanted to do work with computers had to wait to share time on the IBM 370, and as a result, you were given so many resource units that you could use, which was so many minutes on one of the few terminals, and they got cheaper the further into the night they were, and the result was that there was a huge section of the population at the computer lab that were almost nocturnal, and Roger was one of them. So he was very serious. He took the whole thing very seriously. I almost, you know, fun and socialising wasn't something I saw him doing. He was always there, and he produced results in the most astonishing speed. And they were always right. I mean, it always worked. Magic. But there was quite a lot of fun and games as well. So the rest of Acorn, by that time, we'd acquired some of the trappings of a larger version of an SME. So we had some people that, you had a core group of developers who were very dedicated and hardworking, and you had a few fun lovers and fooler-arounders.
I mean, at that time Acorn was doing extremely well. You were sponsoring race cars and seemingly living the high life.
Yeah, we had been growing, and we had to grow to support the increasing customer base and to support the serious extra responsibilities that we found once we'd got this. We'd become almost institutionalised with this relationship with the BBC. So there were a lot more people in the company, and there were organisational people which we hadn't really had before. Serious people that. I mean, it wasn't all easy. We had to get production and on time, which didn't always happen. And when it didn't happen, we had the head of the DTI on the phone. He called us up and said, "Why haven't you delivered these computers for the BBC?" And we had to go and tell him why and why. So there were questions like, this was a time when people were building computers of various sorts, and there were shortages of certain components like DRAM. And DRAM was an expensive part of the bill of materials, and you had to order them almost a year in advance to be sure of getting them delivered. This was terribly new to us. It was not something that we were very good at, and having a sort of supply line as long as a year and we were having to book production with companies in Wales, in China, or rather Hong Kong, and make sure they all got their components in time. So we had a lot of people doing a lot of different things by then, and of course a sales force, because our original rather easy mail order business had long since been taken over by selling most of our product through high street retailers, which meant you had to have people that dealt with them. And although I used to deal with them, this became a job for a small fleet of sales engineers and sales and marketing people. So the numbers have been rising steadily, and once you've got a lot of different departments and a lot of different people, groups of people, there are people that take life very lightheartedly and people that take it very seriously. So we had a mixture. It was always, it was one of those companies I used to be rather proud to say, nobody's ever left us. Everybody liked working there and could see that the future looked good. So we used to get one or two people from some of our competitors wanting to know if we'd like them to come and work for us. It never happened the other way around, which was comforting at the time, but important. So the question of atmosphere, it was always enthusiasm, growth, and opportunity. And then we sort of headed for that time when we did our flotation as well on the secondary market of the unlisted securities market. And it all took it all in our stride, and we issued share options and things, and it all seemed jolly good. It wasn't actually as good as it could have been. Share options didn't work because shortly after the flotation, things went a bit downhill, and then a lot downhill.